You call this a tour of retribution, Senator Padilla? President Trump's voice cut through the air, sharp and clear, silencing the cavernous factory floor. Let me tell you what retribution looks like. It's retribution against the rusted-out factories and forgotten towns. It's retribution against the foreign competitors who stole our jobs. I call it a tour of promises kept. The sterile chill of the morning news studio was a stark contrast to the fire Senator Alex Padilla was spitting into the camera. On the giant screen behind him, a looped video played in silent, damning repetition. Padilla, looking defiant, being calmly escorted by federal agents from a Homeland Security press conference. It's a campaign of fear, Padilla declared, his voice resonating with practiced indignation. He leaned into the microphone, his eyes finding the lens with the precision of a heat-seeking missile. What you are witnessing is the beginning of President Trump's tour of retribution. He is using the power of the federal government to silence dissent, to punish his political enemies, and to intimidate anyone who dares to speak truth to power. I was removed not for causing a disruption, but for attempting to ask a question. This is a presidency that is afraid of the truth. He was good. His words were poison, but they were coated in the honey of righteous victimhood. The host nodded along, his expression a mask of grave concern. The chyron at the bottom of the screen blared, Senator Padilla, Trump's tour of retribution, a threat to democracy. Padilla's team had worked through the night. The phrase was sticky, malicious, and perfectly engineered to dominate the news cycle. It painted a picture of a vengeful president, a tyrant using the nation's security apparatus as his personal goon squad. By sunrise, #Tour of Retribution was trending. Padilla wasn't just a senator anymore. He was a political martyr, a hero forged in the fires of a 30-second news clip. He sat back in his chair as the segment ended, a thin, arrogant smile playing on his lips. The first shot had been fired, and it was a direct hit. Miles above, aboard Air Force One, the atmosphere was thick with anxiety. An aide held up a tablet, the screen filled with Padilla's sanctimonious face. Mr. President, he's calling it a, quote, tour of retribution. Every network has picked it up. They're running with it. We need to issue a statement. Get ahead of this. We need to fight back. President Donald Trump didn't even glance at the screen. He was looking out the window, at the patchwork of American fields and towns scrolling by beneath them. He was reviewing a thick binder filled not with polling data or talking points, but with economic reports, infrastructure proposals, and letters from community leaders in towns the national media had long since forgotten. He finally looked away from the window and met his aide's panicked gaze. His expression wasn't angry or worried. It was calm, almost amused. Let him have his morning show, Trump said, his voice a low, steady rumble. Let him scream into the void. He's playing checkers on a television set. We're out here playing chess on the American landscape. He closed the binder with a decisive thud. He wants to talk about retribution? Fine. Let's go give him something to really talk about. Air Force One didn't land at a major international airport flanked by a cheering rally crowd. It touched down at a small, regional airstrip in a deep blue corner of the country, a place where hope had been packed up and shipped overseas decades ago. The destination was the skeletal remains of a factory, a rusted monument to a bygone era of American industry. There was no grand stage, no sea of red hats. The audience was a few dozen local reporters and a crowd of about 200 factory workers, their faces etched with a mixture of skepticism and desperate hope. President Trump, flanked by his Commerce Secretary, walked past the dormant machinery, his hand ghosting over the cold, silent steel. He stepped up to a simple wooden lectern. There was no teleprompter. For 30 years, this place has been quiet, Trump began, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. He wasn't shouting, he was speaking to them, not at them. For 30 years, you were told these jobs weren't coming back. You were told to learn to code, to adapt, to accept a new reality written for you by people thousands of miles away who've never set foot in your town. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. Well, I'm here to tell you that's a lie. He gestured to a group of executives standing nearby. Thanks to a new trade agreement we just signed, and a federal investment in American manufacturing, This factory is reopening. 400 jobs are coming back. Right here. Right now. A wave of stunned silence was broken by a single, tentative clap. Then another. Within seconds, the factory was filled with a roar of applause. A sound of genuine, life-altering relief that no political rally could ever replicate. Trump spent the next hour talking to the workers, shaking hands, and learning the names of the men and women whose lives had just been changed. The local news crews captured every moment. The national media, caught flat-footed, had nothing to report but the facts. As the day wore on, the pattern repeated. A visit to a port city to announce a federal grant to modernize its shipping lanes, creating hundreds of union jobs. A stop in a rural community to break ground on a new high-tech agricultural research center. Each event was meticulously planned and laser-focused on economic revival. Each event was in a town that had been written off, in a state that had voted against him. Back in his D.C. office, Senator Padilla watched the local news feeds with growing fury. His narrative was crumbling. The tour of retribution was being drowned out by a quote-unquote tour of revitalization. The image of the vengeful tyrant was being replaced by the image of a president at work. His perfectly crafted media storm was dissipating into scattered local showers of good news. "He's hijacking my message!" Padilla snarled at his chief of staff, throwing a pen across his desk. "He's turning my attack into a damn PR tour!" "The locals are eating it up," his aide said, scrolling through his phone. "They're calling it the comeback tour. Our hashtag is getting buried." Desperation clawed at Padilla. He had to reclaim the narrative. He had to force the confrontation. "Find out where his last stop is," Padilla commanded. "We're going there." "He wants to avoid a fight? We'll bring the fight to him." The final stop was a sprawling manufacturing plant, once on the brink of closure, now humming with activity. The air smelled of hot metal and fresh paint. President Trump was on a small stage, speaking to the workers during their shift change. The mood was jubilant. Suddenly, a commotion erupted at the back of the crowd. Alex Padilla, flanked by a small group of aides with phones already recording, pushed his way to the front. The national press, tipped off by Padilla's team, swarmed around him like sharks sensing blood. "Mr. President!" Padilla shouted, his voice dripping with righteous fury. He had his moment. He had his cameras. "How can you stand here and talk about jobs when you are on a national tour of retribution against your political opponents? You are using the power of your office to silence and intimidate." The factory floor fell silent. The workers turned, their expressions shifting from joy to confusion and anger. The air crackled with tension. President Trump stopped speaking. He slowly turned his head and fixed his gaze on the senator. There was no anger in his eyes, only a profound, dismissive disappointment. He let the silence hang for a beat, forcing everyone to focus, to feel the weight of the interruption. Then, he spoke, and his voice, amplified by the microphone, was a weapon of pure, unadulterated truth. "You call this a tour of retribution, Senator Padilla?" Trump's voice cut through the air, sharp and clear. He gestured not at Padilla, but at the men and women in hard hats standing around them. "Look at these people. Ask them about retribution." He pointed to a massive, newly installed robotic arm. "That machine right there? That's retribution against the idea that American manufacturing is dead. The new shipping orders posted on that board?" He gestured to the wall. "That's retribution against the unfair trade deals that bled this country dry for half a century." He took a step forward, his voice rising with controlled power. "You flew all the way out here, Senator, to get in front of a camera and shout about your bruised ego. You talk about a tour of retribution because you think politics is about you. I came here to talk about them." He swept his arm across the crowd of workers. "Their jobs, their families, their future." He lowered his voice, making his final point a devastatingly personal blow. "Let me tell you what retribution looks like. It's retribution against the rusted-out factories and forgotten towns. It's retribution against the foreign competitors who stole our jobs. I call it a tour of promises kept." A thunderous roar erupted from the workers. It wasn't a political cheer. It was a primal roar of approval, a validation of action over words. They turned their backs on Padilla, their faces filled with disgust for the politician who had tried to spoil their moment of victory. Senator Alex Padilla just stood there, speechless. The cameras were still on him, but his face, once a mask of arrogant defiance, was now pale and slack-jawed. He had walked into the lion's den, expecting to be the ringmaster, only to find himself utterly and completely devoured. He had come armed with a soundbite, a malicious phrase he thought was clever. President Trump had come armed with reality. In this arena, on this day, reality had won. Padilla's desperate stunt had backfired spectacularly, exposing him not as a hero of dissent, but as a cynical, self-serving fool, utterly defeated by the quiet power of a promise fulfilled. What was the critical mistake Senator Padilla made in his strategy to confront the president? And what did President Trump's response reveal about his own understanding of political power? Share your analysis in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.